Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Table Manners for Robots. Once again, we keep traversing the world of technology in business, in particular, looking at how we use technology in the changing world of business and how we become more dependent on technology to help us solve some of the challenges that we are facing anew. All right. On that note, I am very excited about today's show. As always, I've gotten a chance to solve some of my own queries on the subject of security in a cloud world. It's often that many of us think that because we are using cloud service providers, obviously very prominent brands from around the world, very trusted, credible, reliable brands from around the world, we believe that our security is taken care of on our behalf because we have invested in said cloud platform. Does it in fact mean that we don't have to take further action? Do we have to do more in the way of policies? Do we have to have a more integrated approach to reviewing the cloud technologies that we are using and that will allow us to monitor and manage these different cloud technologies and what we are doing with them? These are some of the questions that I, for myself, have had for a while now, and I'm very happy that we were able to get these questions answered, and we're going to be able to show you some of these fantastic answers that we collected during the course of today's show. Yet again, we have exceptional guest experts who have given us advice in terms of answering all of my questions. We've really yet again cracked it, and we have the best of the best answers from the best of the best people from around the world. So in particular, we have Nigel Hawthorne, who is the EMEA Marketing Director for McAfee. And then we have the South African Country Manager, Carlo B. He has quite a surname, quite a last name, but he goes as Carlo B on LinkedIn, so I'm going to stick with that. So let's do this. Let's get to know our expert guests a little bit better. Let's see what they have to say about themselves, and then we will check back in.
You might be surprised to hear that actually I'm on my gap year. So before going to university or doing anything else, I decided to join the IT industry, and here I am many, many years later. I've worked for a number of different companies. I lived in California for a couple of years, and now I talk a lot to governance, risk, and compliance people, as well as IT people, because in my world, I'm very passionate about the fact that I think IT security is everybody's problem, and we IT people have got to spend our time trying to help educate and influence other people outside the IT department.
My background's a little bit different to Nigel's. I got into the IT industry by chance, actually. I was bouncing around in my youth, finished school, had some odd jobs, and then my oldest brother, actually, his friend owned a IT company, and he was looking for somebody to come along as apprentice. And that's basically where I started out, right? Fiddling with machines with Windows 3.1 and 3.11, doing network cabling, and so sort of progressed through that space, and then got into the security piece because that really interested me. The interest was there, the antivirus piece, and that's sort of where I took my cue, and I've fortunately, I have never looked back. So it's been a really good experience to have come this way.
All right. So taking into account that, we have been getting to know, or we like getting to know our guest speakers just a little bit better, and we like going into a little bit more of the human aspect of their background. Of course, I probed a little bit more, and I wanted to know exactly a little bit more, what led our speakers into their specific areas of specialization. Let's take a look.
From my side, I think what keeps me here and what keeps me going is seeing what's happening with our customers or potential customers, and being available to actually help those customers going through it, because for them, that's important. For me, is to see a positive outcomes for our customer, but it's at the same time, it's quite exciting for me to still stick to see those changes that are keeping us abreast with things. So like Nigel was saying, the way the technology is evolving continuously, that keeps me quite interested in actually what we're still doing. and why I'm still here in this industry.
As I said, I love sort of reinventing myself. And so over the years, I was in PCs and then networking and then web filtering and mobility and cloud. So 7 years ago or so, cloud was still relatively new in many countries. And yet this company came along called Sky High Networks that was saying, we need to reinvent IT security for the cloud world. That many of the problems that we've tried to solve in on-premises systems are now happening again for cloud. And so I love being involved in technologies that are relatively new, talking about something that's interesting and different. And that's why I joined the company Sky High that became McAfee. And that's why I've been talking about cloud now for a few years.
All right, always interesting to get to know our speakers a little bit more, to understand them a little bit more on a personal level. As always, we love your feedback. We love your engagement. We love it when you send questions through, and I do my best to address every single question that comes through, whether it's via the Q&A box on Zoom, whether it is just in the chat box on Zoom, or even if you send in a comment on one of the live platforms. Totally fine by us. We welcome all forms of input into the show. In fact, your input determines how the show goes, because based on the question that you ask, we try our best to line up an insert that's going to address your question. So please feel free to ask questions, send your questions through the various means, and I will take them up as we go on. We will also be sending out a webinar feedback link in just a little while so that we can collect your feedback as always. All right. So let's have a look in the next, for the next insert. I asked Nigel about his comments on the context of the South African situation right now. Let's take a look.
So in terms of, what's happening in South Africa, I think on the positive side, a lot of people don't realize this, but South African industries are big, industries are in certain ways quite ahead of our peers globally, right? And that's really encouraging to see. With some of the challenges that we do face, things like the pandemic, they may be seen, and what we're seeing is South African businesses who were historically quite reluctant to the work from home process compared to some of our peers globally, have adopted it and have actually taken it and run with it a lot better in some cases than some of the peers that I've worked with or some of the customers that I've worked with overseas. So there's been positives and negatives, I think, for the South African market, the upheaval of actually shifting to work from home, the COVID piece, but there's also positives, right? The positives are that the businesses are almost coming out of our shells that we were so used to being as a South African market. It's forced us to actually become and expose ourselves a lot more, and that's good. That's good from a consumption of technology, but it's also good for people in the workplace as well.
All right, so apologies for my error there. I actually said that it was Nigel answering the question. It was in fact Carlo. So let's move along swiftly. We'll go to the next question that I checked in on, and that is, historically, I've always associated the brand McAfee with antivirus. So I would think of it as an individual, or as a consumer of software, I would just see McAfee as the brand that helped me protect my laptop or my computer. Now, of course, there's a lot more to McAfee than meets the eye, and we wanted to get a full understanding from both our speakers of what that bigger picture actually is. So let's take a look.
If you look at it, yes, McAfee many years ago, with our competitor, with our peers, we were an antivirus company, but we did a lot more than that. And the company itself has evolved, considerably since then. Yes, we still have our AV. It's and it plays a big part in what we do in securing our customers, especially in our model from our device to cloud strategy. But McAfee is a brand. We've got cloud, and cloud for us, is massive. What we're doing in the cloud, protecting our customers' data, giving our customers visibility and the controls. We're a lot more than just that antivirus company that people associate with the name or the brand of McAfee. But we also look, if you look at the company itself, we also have components that live on the network layer. But our strategy today is really focused around the endpoint, which is your laptop, and the cloud piece, because we understand that our customers in that space need to have controls that are useful and provide the same meaning that they've been used to prior to the cloud or the uptake of the cloud. So I think, that perception of McAfee being this dinosaur, if you spend some time with the technology, you'll see that there's so much more than just an AV product that we've been known for so long.
Yeah, well, it was interesting when I joined the company, Carlo, because 3 years ago, McAfee acquired Sky High Networks. And since then, we've spent a lot of time with the development teams trying to make sure that what we're delivering to people is consistency. That if they want policies to safeguard a particular document, for instance, so DLP as it's called, that the same policy gets implemented whether somebody is saving it to a USB stick, emailing it to somebody, sharing it via a cloud. And so actually, I think the great thing about being part of a bigger organization is that ability to give customers solutions that are in the round and trying to give them everything that we can to ensure that their data is kept safe.
All right, so I hope it's starting to clear up for you as well, where all of this is fitting together. And, I hope you're getting a better understanding of who McAfee is as a brand. So we do have some questions coming through, which is fantastic. So keep the questions coming through. This will help us determine how the show is going to go. We will line up the content segments and inserts based on your questions. So Rukshana, thank you for asking a question here. The question is, which security issues may affect Google Classroom? Which security issues may affect Google Classroom? That is quite a broad question, I think. I do know that I have some quiet backup. We have our expert guests available on the line. They might get involved in a little bit in terms of contributing via text answers. But even still, I will see how we can line up the right content to address some of your question there, Rukshana. And if we don't get a direct answer on the show, we can always follow up with you directly after the show via the webinar feedback form. So while we get all of that lined up and while we get all of that good stuff ready for you, let's take a look at the next big question, and there is some element of overlap here on Rukshana's question. When we are investing in cloud services from the big players, the big brand players, like we have your Microsoft Cloud, you have AWS, and then there's of course Google Cloud. There's a whole lot of services that are underwritten by big players. Why is it that we still need to make additional investment and take additional precautions when we in fact trusting the big players? What is the reason for this? Let's take a look.
This is a very common question, and what we need to do is look at other things in our life. We own cars and we drive them, but we don't expect that the car manufacturer is responsible for everything. We put on our seatbelt, we drive it safely. Hopefully we don't drive it 100 miles an hour into a wall. What I think we've misunderstood is that cloud is similar in that, yes, the cloud service provider has to provide the low-level security, the connectivity to the internet, power, stopping people coming into their building, load balancing, etc. But above that, there's huge amounts of other things that are our responsibility. Our enterprises need to decide which data we're allowed to share and which we're not. We need to decide which users we want to collaborate with. We need to be able to track what users might do. If somebody comes in with a managed device, do they get slightly different policies than they come in with their own device? So what we've got to realize is, yes, the cloud providers, the enterprise-focused cloud providers have a lot of security measures. But number one, we need to turn them on and make sure they're configured correctly. And number two, it's not sufficient. We still need to look at and create policies that are appropriate for our business on top of what the cloud providers do. So,
I mean, just to Nigel's point, for most customers today, I think it's really about looking at a platform versus a vendor conversation, right? So a single vendor, it's great, the concept, but I believe that customers would be more, well, it's actually proven that customers that have a platform, which is a stable platform that they then consolidate on top of with less vendors, actually will provide better security controls and visibility than having multiple different vendors. And the reason for that is because with a few vendors and a stable platform that everybody can leverage, they can leverage things like the benefits of automation for detection and visibility and response, all of those components. Whereas, when you have multiple different vendors, or you have you're going on one route, the challenge you have there is that you are bringing further complexity into an environment when, you've got multiple different consoles to try and do different things, whereas, and there's very little automation. And, so that's one of the challenges that I believe, when you look into the market, not buying into every single unicorn isn't always going, in fact, it's not going to be your solution, because they're very niche in what they do. But there's massive points of gaps that, like Nigel pointed out, that need to be filled, and that doesn't always require going to buy with certain other vendors with, buying additional components. That just brings more complexity to this conversation that we're trying to have, which is the shift to the cloud.
Fantastic. So, Rukshana, I hope that some of your question there was answered. There's obviously, like Nigel said, there's the element of policies, and there are sometimes situations that arise because we are using multiple platforms and we're using multiple service providers, and we do need a single, coordination point so that we can keep abreast of where there may be security gaps. And I do feel that if you would like a little bit of extra help and a little bit more tailored guidance, that you just complete a webinar feedback form. We'll make that available to you now. In fact, we'll make it available to all attendees in the chat box right now. So go ahead and click that link and let us know that you have a question. We've kept the webinar feedback form very simple this time around. So you just have to fill in just a few fields, and then the bulk of it is your text box where you can just throw in any request, any feedback. It's completely open-ended. So you can go ahead and say that you want to have a follow-up meeting. You could say that you'd like a little bit more tailored counsel. You could request an ebook. We do have an ebook available for you guys. So feel free to make any request of your choosing. Of course, we'll do our best to honor it, but it's very free form. So go ahead and have some fun with that. On that note, I wanted to just dive a bit deeper on the point of the risk conversation. I really wanted to unpack and understand what the real risks are. We have a market right now inundated with messaging about security and about remote work and all the vulnerabilities that have arisen as a result of the new form of work. Because of this, and because we are so inundated with this message, I wanted to really double click and figure out what are the real risks. Let's take a look.
The perception that a lot of customers have is we'll just lift and shift, right? And it's positioned that way. Pick up everything and move it to the cloud. The challenge, I think, that people don't get in that process, right? And it even happens to people that are doing a proper migration, is that when you're not focused on the gaps in your cloud, the problem there is that the data now sits off-premise. So everybody traditionally goes to work and they sit behind all this infrastructure, firewalls and proxies and all these good things that the company controls. But now we've got a combination of people working from home and people working from the office. And so there's this office piece which is relatively secured, because where your data is, where your users are. But then when the users in the cloud, or they're using the cloud applications or sharing data, you don't really have that visibility there. So when, I'll give you an example. If I copy a document or some source code between Azure and GCP, Google, right? None of my firewalls, nothing on premise is going to see it unless I have some form of a control sitting in the cloud that says, whoa, you can't copy that because, it's source code, or it's a document that doesn't need to be copied or shouldn't leave this location. And so those are the key things, as we see customers moving the data and their workloads into the cloud, we have to provide those controls. And as Nigel pointed out earlier, we're around the corner from Poppy. There's GDPR that's already in effect. We have to control that data, not just from a DLP aspect, but also from malware. It's also from, the data being sent by mistake by users out of the organization. That's a big problem as well. So that visibility piece, cloud, as cool as it is and as functional as it is, if it isn't secured correctly, you have the visibility and the tools to actually enforce the data loss and the security in the cloud, customers are going to end up having data leakages. And not just that, right? There's the knock-on effect around it is things like reputation. I don't think any company today could tell you what their reputation's worth, but when something bad happens, they know what it's worth then, because people start to talk about it all the time, and not in a positive light, but in a negative light. So, it's important that those controls are extended to the cloud and across multiple clouds as well.
I'd just add to that, if you do a quick search for data loss S3 bucket, what you will find is lots of stories of people who've lost data that was stored in Amazon's AWS system. The important thing about every story is it's never been Amazon's fault. Amazon have lots of security capabilities. You just need to turn them on. Or in fact, with some configurations, you need to make sure you don't turn them off. The problem is, if we don't look at those configurations, then we're starting to write some code, and at the beginning, it probably doesn't matter what the security methods are. But then as you get nearer to delivery of that code, you bring in some test data, and all of a sudden, of course, it's got important information in it. And that's the way that, unfortunately, we sort of sleepwalk into poor configurations and then lose data. And then the other examples would be things like, as Carlo said, often users are inadvertently losing data. Our industry spends a lot of time talking about the bad actors, the threats coming in from outside, but we sort of forget that the statistics I've seen say that 90% of data loss incidents are caused by someone who was just trying to get their job done, didn't understand exactly what the application was doing, or wasn't thinking, or was incredibly overworked. And so you think you're sharing a file, but you're sharing a folder. You think you're sending it to Bob, but you mistype Bob's name and it goes somewhere else. You send an open link, not realizing that that person could then forward it on to someone else. So there's lots of things where we need to work with users, we need to educate them, but we also need to put in technology that helps them make the right decisions. And when they're making the wrong decisions, stop them, question them, coach them, and make sure that the data is kept secure when it goes to the cloud and from the cloud, whatever the user might do.
All right, so this is very, very cool. I hope you are learning quite a lot. I mean, even though I've seen this this content before, I'm still picking up some more detail when I watch it over and over. It is so interesting to discover how we all receive very fancy security functionality that comes resident in the applications or the platforms that we've invested in. But what use is it if we don't know whether they have been enabled or whether in some instances some things need to be disabled? Of what value are these comprehensive lists of features? It's almost like, giving someone all the drugs they need to solve a particular medical condition, and of what value is that if they don't know how to take them? And of what value would be a long list of medication if you are unaware of the dosage, or if you are unaware of what is solving what? Like if you do have a symptom A, then you should take drug B. So really, this is where we need the the duty of an intermediary of sorts, some form of guidance along the way, so we know that we're making the right selections or perhaps making some of the wrong selections. All right, so Nigel, it is fantastic to have you back me up with some answers here. So Rukshana, we do have Nigel's answer here. He sent it through on Zoom. And it says here, on the question around Google Classroom, the security issues are typically making sure the configuration settings are safe. So not a problem with the system itself, but more how it is being configured and used. There's a good article and webinar here discussing some of these issues. So Nigel's been kind enough to send an article through. What we will do in this instance is we will submit that to you, Rukshana, in response to your webinar feedback. So if you can go ahead and complete your webinar feedback, we've placed the link in the Q&A box. If you could go ahead and complete that, we will respond with the link so that you have something to follow up with. All right, we're making some progress here. Lots of things becoming clearer here. I hope you are enjoying the content. So let's have a look at the average business out there. There's a lot of things that we can start dreaming up, but the average business, your average corporate out there, do we have a need to be concerned? And, what's the data around that? What should our concern level be? So let's have a look at that.
The reality is that ransomware is on the rise, okay? And enterprises need to be concerned about it. And the reason why, and I'm just going to take ransomware for a moment, is if you look at ransomware, let's just go back a little bit in time. If I wanted money and I was a bad person, I would physically have to go and get some friends, get a gang together, or maybe I'm going to do it on my own, and physically then go and break into a bank or rob somebody. And there's risks associated with that, right? It's the police catching you, you could be shot. There's a whole multitude of things. So it was a very risky job. But if you look at ransomware and how it's delivered, people are sitting at home and are able to deliver a mechanism to retrieve large volumes or large amounts of cash from organizations for literally not doing too much work. And so that is cottoned on. There's a lot of information around how this has evolved as well. But it is continuing to grow because it's so lucrative, and it is actually so easy in a way for these gangs to actually get into an organization and try and extort them for money. So, the risk is real. And I think in that space, that doesn't exclude the cloud, because malware can move wherever malware can go. Well, malware can live wherever, right? It's source code. It goes places, and that's what makes it so interesting. So, the biggest thing I think that for organizations is basics. That is key to anything. And I think Nigel touched on it earlier, right? Which is that's common set of controls, understanding what it is and what is going out, and that visibility in a way. Basic hygiene, things like patch management, which is historically one of the worst jobs in the world because you're continuously playing catch up. But it is critical that those patches are deployed timelessly. And, there's some challenges around that, but that's the kind of things that organizations today should be focused on, is those basics, not just on premise, but you've also got the cloud as well. So, it is real. The threat is real. And unfortunately, it's not a scare tactic, but you can open your browser today and literally every single day we're seeing big global corporations that have either been ransomware or lost data or whatever the case being. So it's continuous. And, just briefly in the South African market context, if I look at it, any South African business that is doing business overseas or has sister companies overseas or affiliates, you're as susceptible as anybody else globally. Your brand is out there. The focus is around you.
All right. We have Delian here asking if the webinar recording is available somewhere. The answer is yes, absolutely yes. We have all of our webinar recordings available. We make it publicly available on YouTube. You can access it. The easiest way to access it would be to go to tablemannersforrobots.com. and then you'll be redirected to our the show page. So it's actually a web page which contains all of the episodes. However, you have another way of accessing it. If you choose to do it this way, you can go directly to YouTube and you can search for my channel, Kirushan Govender, and then in my channel you will have, in amongst some other videos, you will have these recordings as well. So Delian, there are two ways to access that. So go ahead and do that. All right. Now, of course, we're getting a lot of good information here about all of these things that could potentially go wrong. And in fact, we have these cloud services, we have all of these providers, they're doing what they committed to, but still there's an element of vulnerability that we face that we need to own. So let's look at that in greater detail. Who then owns that risk? Whose responsibility within the organization is it to, in fact, correct this and ensure that we have some kind of intermediary or another layer of protection that helps us get back onto the right track? Whose responsibility is this? Let's take a look.
Well, I'm going to start by saying I feel sorry for IT. I feel sorry for IT because they're always working under immense pressure. The applications are providing new features that maybe are being rolled out without IT's control. And they shoulder the burden that most people think that IT security is primarily an IT problem. But actually, often I think it's a business problem. It's a user problem. It's a decide the policy problem. And you can't always blame IT when somebody else hasn't come in and said, well, let's talk about this. Let's make a decision. And I love using examples. Here's an example. Can Carlo share with his sister-in-law a document that happens to have 5 McAfee employee email addresses on it? Because it was a document that was also useful for her for something else. Is that okay? And if it's okay, can she edit it? Can she download it? Can she forward it on to someone else? And what you need to do is you need to sit down and have a workshop with lots of different departments together, people representing the users as well as the risk people or maybe the legal people, and actually pick out some examples and say, okay, what in a perfect world should the policy be for that circumstance? And then try to work out what you need to do and how you need to educate your users first on what the policies are, and then how you need to enforce them, because you will always need to enforce them. But it should really start with the policy, not start with the technology. And honestly, you really need to get together with different teams. The data owner, for instance, can only make the decision about which data is confidential and which isn't. And they need to understand the possible problems. And that's why I think it's so important to get people from multiple departments working together.
Very insightful indeed, and certainly a lot of understanding of the plight of the IT folk. So if you are from IT, I hope you enjoyed that in particular. All right, so let's go another level deeper. Obviously, a lot of us are working in scenarios where we don't work alone, and we are depending on the involvement and help and participation of others around us. Now, what do we do in situations where we are perhaps working with a group of people, maybe another department, that doesn't necessarily see this as their responsibility? What do we do? How do we overcome this challenge? Let's take a look.
I found this really quite difficult. I talk at events for governance, risk and compliance people, and honestly, at the beginning of my conversation, they do think it's all the responsibility of the cloud service provider. I don't need to worry about it. And if it's not the cloud service provider, it's the IT department. It's nothing to do with me. And what I did was I realized that they really needed help to understand why it's everybody's responsibility and why in particular it's their responsibility. So I wrote a paper called the 360-degree shared responsibility model. You can download it from the McAfee website free of charge. And it is trying to help educate non-IT people that this matters and this matters to you. And so really, I hope that will help you if you're finding it difficult internally to get anyone else to pay attention. The finance department, for instance, often don't seem to worry. And of course, users often think, Yeah, I like rules for other people, but for me, I really need to use this new funky cloud service, and I'm not going to ask anyone for approval. Everybody needs to come together, and that's what the paper tries to achieve.
I think just adding to what Nigel was saying as well, and I'll come from the IT side of things as well, is that IT they procure a tool, and the tool is designed to deliver the outcomes of what the rest of the business is decided in terms of the policy and how do you actually protect the data. The tool isn't the silver bullet. It's not going to go and do everything. You need to teach that tool, and that teachings comes from those policies, those regulations, those definitions of classifications for the data as well. I think that's very important for organizations to also be aware of,
All right. Really hope that you are enjoying this content. I hope that you are learning a lot from this. Again, feel free to send your questions through. I have a screen in front of me which shows me every question, every comment. So I will be sure to address any of your comments or questions through the live show, and we will line up the relevant content item in relation to what you're asking. Okay, now on that note, I also want to remind you very quickly to complete your webinar feedback. It is critical for me to get your feedback. We want to make this show the best show there is on technology matters here, on African soil. It's very homegrown. It's very important to us to have a voice, a very high quality show that we're making available free of charge right here in Africa. So that's important to us, and we want your cooperation and your support and your participation in this regard. So on that note, while we wait for more of your questions to come through, I went ahead and asked both Carlo and Nigel to tell us about any interesting client situations they've run into, and to just describe, some of the interesting tidbits inside them. Let's see what they had to say.
So I think, if I took a customer today that we have, and I'm just going to take it's a bit of a story where they were, what changed, and how the sort of progression happened. Was we had a customer who had said to us that the world was great, and the cloud, they were going there, and they built all these guardrails and all these bits and pieces that on paper were fantastic, and then they started to work through all these bits and pieces where they'd said the services have to be cloud native, they can't be on-prem, and there's reams and reams of paper. And so they started to migrate their data to the cloud, and they followed this process, or so they believed, until very recently they started to see some strange behavior in their cloud. And that was alerted during a pilot of what we were doing with them at the time. And we were showing them that there was these strange connections coming in from places around the world that they had no staff. They had no interaction with, not whatsoever, but we were seeing connections arriving at their infrastructure in the cloud. And some of it was getting in, but a lot of it was being blocked. And so when we sat with the customer, we showed this, and they were quite taken aback, because they had believed that they had bought the security solution, which was, I've shifted to the cloud and everything is there. And so when we showed this to them, we identified what was going on, and we spent some time with the customer. We were able to show the customer that, with a few clicks of a button, we can solve the problem, right? And it goes away. But now you've got control and visibility of your technology. And that changed the conversation quite a lot from the customer's perspective, because he wasn't, one of the things we do is we do a shadow, or we can do a pilot where we just show you what is actually happening in your cloud environments across all three of the big players out there today. And that will help, I think, with any customer. Where that's changed is when a customer says, I'm embarking on the cloud journey, and I've invested in all these tools, and we've done the mathematics, and we've done all the bits and pieces. Let us just do a quick Q&A for you. Let's just validate what you've done, what you've invested in, and your plan is working correctly. And I think that helped this customer a lot down the line, because they understood that there were challenges in how they had gone about securing the data in the cloud.
I think what I can do is pull together multiple clients and say that every time that we've performed one of these assessments that Carlo mentioned, we've asked beforehand, how many cloud services do you think you have? And the numbers have come back between, I don't know, 10 and maybe 100. And we've always found thousands of cloud services. So the assessment's really important to try to make sure that you work out just the scale of the issue you have to address. And then the other thing I think is so important is consistency of policies. And many of our customers are global with systems around the world, and they want to try to pull together some consistency so that data that is important to the organization, such as financial information, etc., doesn't leak out early. Because there's a lot more to the threats than just possible fines from regulators. There is brand awareness, as Carlo mentioned, and brand value. There is the cost of the organization actually being down for a while if you're hit by ransomware. So the fines may be eye-watering, but how much does it cost to have no work done for 3 days? So lots of cases where real life impact has been seen because somebody hasn't put in the appropriate controls. We need to make sure that we're looking at all the possible problems and addressing as many as we can.
All right, so very informative indeed. I often talk to IT decision makers, I talk to technology decision makers, people across the business who are looking to ensure that they have the right infrastructure and tools to be productive and successful in their businesses. And one of the things that I run into in my discussions with business leaders and decision makers is that they don't want to continue making investments in additional platforms. They don't want to add more and more stuff into the environment. They would prefer to simplify, to make 1 or 2 core strategic investments and then, build on from there. However, we are working in a very new world of software and applications, very unlike how it used to be even, I would say, 5 to 10 years ago. And in this new world, there are a number of providers, a number of software applications that we are having to admit, either at the user level or at the organizational level. So I did address this point of adding more solutions into the environment and adding more solutions into the organization. I did address this directly with our expert guests, and let's see what they had to say.
I think the mistake that some people make is they look just at one system. And yes, we might all live, for instance, in Microsoft 365. And so they say, well, Microsoft 365 is what matters. But actually, you ask them, well, what other cloud services have you got? And they'll say, well, we have Workday for HR, and we have ServiceNow, and we have Salesforce, and we use Concur for expenses. And all of a sudden, you realize that they don't have one application, but they have 25, or they have 50, or they say, oh, yeah, well, we also got AWS for the development team. And then these marketing people use Trello to try to coordinate their time. And all of these systems need some level of security, even if that security is just integrating with single sign-on. But maybe that security is logging, or making sure that you know what users are doing, or stopping interactions with external third parties without them being tracked and controlled. So actually, yes, you can buy additional security from almost all of those. You pay extra, and as Carlo said earlier, you'll then have maybe 20 different setups that are all slightly different. They all do slightly different things. And will you keep them all together in line? Well, probably not. Better than that would be a single platform that says, for all of these cloud services and more, let's put in consistent policies. And let's make sure that we're working with a company who are investing in cloud services. So in the last few weeks, for instance, we've announced support, additional support for Zoom and for Microsoft Dynamics. And it goes on, and we're constantly working with cloud service providers to ensure that they can support our platform, and we can then give people a single place to look at and manage everything that they're doing in the cloud, whichever application it is.
Folks, I hope you're enjoying this. I hope you're finding this very valuable. Please go ahead and complete a webinar feedback form. This really helps us ensure that we're delivering quality back to you. And we also give you the opportunity of making any request of your choosing. You may want to request a follow-up session. You may request more information be sent to you. You may even request an ebook. We have a wonderful ebook to do with the subject that we can make available to you. It's a free ebook that we've put together. So there's quite a lot of good stuff that we could send your way. Please go ahead and complete a webinar feedback form and request anything that you'd like as appropriate. In terms of this topic, I'm sure all of us can agree that we are often surrounded by leaders who are sometimes hesitant to spend, and rightfully so. We are in a market where spending is definitely, there's a lot more care applied to the subject of spending than perhaps prior to the situation we faced last year. So on that note, how do we manage this process? How do we handle ourselves if we are hesitant to spend? How do we manage leaders that we are associated with who are perhaps hesitant to spend? We asked that question. Let's see the answer.
So, it's always a difficult conversation to have with business. Business, first and foremost, business has to do business. That's the key here. However, with that said, and this is sort of this double-edged sword, and we're seeing it more and more with incidents, is that, maybe again, and this talks to an earlier statement I made, is look at the platform conversation. Reducing costs from multiple vendors can, and you can consolidate your technology and use the automation from those combined solutions, which is less than, the multiple that you had before, to achieve the same or better outcomes. And I think that's one of the pieces that I think businesses should be looking at, especially when you're shifting to the cloud and things. It's those consolidation, that platform, that look and feel does reduce costs. Spending money is difficult, and nobody really wants to. But then again, I think Nigel pointed out earlier that when something happens and your business is dead in the water for 3 to 4, 5, 6, 7 days, even longer sometimes, you're losing revenue that was coming in. And that can be more impactful than the fact that you went and invested in a platform or built a blueprint of solutions to try and protect. It may seem expensive initially, but when you comes time to actually leverage those tools, it may be in your best interest to have said that was our best purchase or our best acquisition going forward.
Yeah, I think to emphasize this, there's always a cost. There's a cost of doing nothing. And if you put this on this is too hard to look at, or we've got a new budget round in a year's time, you've got to realize that you're leaving yourself open to risk today. And so, you do need to, as business leaders, look at what's going on, do one of these assessments, try to make sure that what you're doing today isn't increasing your risk as you move data and move systems to the cloud. The cloud can be incredibly powerful and incredibly secure as long as you do it properly. So, this isn't us trying to say, don't go to the cloud, folks, but it is saying, let's go to the cloud with our eyes open and try to make sure that we're using it effectively and securely.
Okay. So, I want to reiterate Nigel's point here about the cost of doing nothing. I mean, many of us have learned this the hard way, particularly over recent months, that there is a severe cost to doing nothing. I mean, there were times, I'm sure, when it just becomes easier not to confront a problem and to kind of just leave it. But right now, with all the risk that we're seeing and all of the realities of that are coming to bear, we realize that there is a great amount of cost to the organization just by taking no action. So this is no longer a luxury we have. Things are a lot tighter. We have to be a lot more astute. We have to be a lot more proactive in our own protection. And for these reasons, I would urge you to make a follow-up inquiry, reach out to us, let us know via the webinar feedback form whether you'd like to take any additional steps, even if it's as simple as you want to ask a few more questions, you'd like a one-to-one engagement, you'd like to inquire about something like an assessment, any such please go ahead and request that in the webinar feedback form, and we will absolutely respond to every single request that we receive. You know, one of the things that I run into is that a lot of companies do get nervous about choosing a solution where they become beholden to that supplier over a long period of time. And we did get our speakers to address that question. So I want you to know that that's coming up shortly. Delian, I'm very aware of your question here. You are asking a very specific question about the security of your files on Google Suite, on G Suite. And, you know, this is actually a concern, especially in regards to Papia. So, Delian, just so that you know, I would like you to put that into the webinar feedback, and we are going to get back to you. We have a show coming up with dedicated content on the Papia point. We've also got an ebook download available that we can send you the link to. So we do have some help for you on this particular question. I don't want to take it up in too much detail right now because we have some excellent content coming your way in the next coming weeks on this point, and we will absolutely follow up with you with a useful link. So let's just go back now to the discussion. I think we are going to ask just maybe one last question here to our expert guests to ensure that we finish up on time. And let's see what they have to say in regards to choosing a supplier that might make us beholden to them.
I think there's good news in the way the industry is structured today, which is that most customers are buying licenses to use software for a period of time, 1 year or 3 years. And that gives them the flexibility to then change to another supplier if they want to. And the good news about that is that it keeps vendors like us innovating. We have to keep adding extra features to what we're delivering to make sure that you stay with us for the future. The other thing I'm seeing is a lot more integration between different companies. Now, McAfee actually took the lead in this many years ago with their SIA partners. So there's about 100 different technology partners that we work with to make sure that the systems interoperate. And sometimes these partners might also be competitors for some of our solutions. So customers can move around, but I think the important thing is to make sure you don't buy from a company who locks you in to only their technology, and that you can therefore be flexible and move if you need to in the future.
And I think just from my side, I mean, just adding to what Nigel was saying as well, you know, if you look at what's happening in that integration space, you know, as a customer, at the end of the day, if you embark on this journey and you move between different vendors and things like that, but you know, the critical thing is how much of that can you actually reuse to actually show different value in your organization. And so, you know, again, just on Nigel's point, where we have this integration with multiple different vendors that bring different aspects and components to a customer, you know, you're going to look at other vendors, but we have to innovate. And so we innovate with partners to keep ourselves fresh and delivering what our customers require from us continuously.
This is awesome. I really, really hope that you've enjoyed the content of today's show. For me, I found it very easy to understand. I found the speakers to be very insightful, but still delivering the information in a way that's very palatable. It's, you know, even very easy to consume from a non-IT standpoint. So I really appreciated that in terms of the content from our expert guests. We will close out on some parting shots from both of our speakers. We asked them for any, you know, last bits of advice. Again, I want to ask if you guys please complete a webinar feedback form. This is very important to us. We take it very seriously. And of course, we won't be taking any more questions at this point, but you still can go ahead and ask questions via the webinar feedback link, and we will absolutely get to every single question. We will respond to every person who requests a response. On that note, let's see what our speakers have to say in terms of final pieces of advice.
There's a couple of things that I would say, and one is just watch what you're doing yourself. Here we are, we're recording this on Teams. We could be sharing a screen. If we share a screen and one of us receives a message, does that appear at the top of the screen? And could that be something that we shouldn't be sharing? So think about everything that you're doing and realize that all your employees are doing the same. And if you want to know more about Teams, just Google Teams top 10 security threats, and you'll see another paper that talks about the top 10 things that people can get wrong in Teams. But let's remember again, it's not Microsoft's fault. The code is there to give you all sorts of powerful features. Just some of those features might not be appropriate in every situation. And then the second piece of advice really is just keep talking, and keep talking to people outside IT, because this really is a shared responsibility between every person in the organization. And we need to be more open. We need to communicate better. Maybe we communicate within the organization threats that we've seen before so that we can all learn from them. It's about making sure that we're all on the journey together to ensure that we're using the cloud safely and securely.
So I think from my perspective, what is critical for me is for customers to, as I said before, the basics, right? Don't disregard the basics. That's where you need to be focused heavily today. And looking at what you're doing, and that's for every sort of aspect of what, be it cloud, be it on-premise, be it with whatever we're doing in the IT space, is the basics and the fundamentals are critical to success. It's critical to the security outcomes of an organization as well. So for me, I think that is the most important piece, is make sure your teams have enough leeway to be able to maintain the basics and then build on top of that, because that is critical to your outcomes.
Well, thank you all for attending the show. I hope you found it valuable. Thank you for taking the time out to participate, send your questions through, and engage with us. Thank you particularly to our expert guests. I think they've done a fantastic job. They've really helped a ton. I feel better off for it. And once again, we will have our next episode lined up coming to you shortly. We will announce it on social media as always. We will notify you by email if you are an email subscriber. Please ensure you head over to kirusian.com to subscribe if you're not currently a subscriber. And we will, ensure that we work hard to get you the content that you're looking for. If there is a particular topic you would like us to cover, let us know via the webinar feedback form. On that note, thank you so much and do well.